hero turned a monster. A short story by A. Happy Ubngagerwe. Mugisha and Kaitesi looked like a happy couple from outside. What outsiders did not understand was that as born-again Christians, they needed to smile to mask their inner pain. There is a saying that marriage without love is immoral. Mugisha loved his wife, Kaitesi, so dearly. He believed she loved him too, even though he wondered why she sometimes refused to be intimate with him, if she indeed loved him. Whenever Mugisha touched Kaitesi, she turned grey and pushed him away. If she did not have a headache, she complained about a stomachache or would just say she was tired. A few times, Kaitesi opened up to her husband and told him that she had probably developed phobia for sex because of what she endured in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Mugisha felt his wife's pain. Luckily, she had accepted to seek help, and her husband had decided to accompany her in the healing journey. They sought advice from their religious leaders. They visited professional marriage counselors. As a born-again Christian, Mugisha believed he was simply passing through a spiritual test. He needed to prove to God that he was able. He loved his wife and knew she had nobody else in the world but him. On that evening of 14th December 2015, as Mugisha was driving home from work, enigmas about his marriage danced hip-hop in his head. He was already in the holiday mood. He wanted to get home, freshen up, share tea with his wife, and have a wonderful night, holding her in his arms. He prayed that she would allow him to touch her, caress her, and make love to her. However, he could remember that the last time they were at the marriage counselor, Kaitesi had mentioned something Mugisha did not understand. Since then, she had refused to explain to her husband what she had meant by, "The monster is back in my life." Has one of her rapists come back? Mugisha wondered. Is he one of the people who have been released from prison? Is he one of the Rwandans who have returned to Rwanda from Congo DRC? He wished his wife had told him who that monster was. Instead, Kaitesi had turned against her husband, as if he was the monster she was talking about. She had never talked to him with disrespect before. She had never quarreled with him. But in those days, Mugisha couldn't recognize her anymore. Anything he said about himself, his new job, his friends, Kaitesi responded back with bitterness. Mugisha had decided it was going to be that evening or never. The counselors have failed, he mused. I'm going to do it myself. He had to make sure Kaitesi talks whether she wanted or not. When Mugisha arrived at home, he found the door to their house widely open. He entered the living room, calling his wife's name. She did not respond. Mugisha headed to their bedroom. Kaitesi was in the room, fully unclothed, gently applying body lotion on her brown skin. Her eyes were bloodshot, as if she had wept. When she saw her husband, she jumped out of her skin. She shivered, but after a few seconds, she pretended she was okay. Mugisha acted as if he had not noticed his wife's uneasiness and approached to kiss her on the cheek. She allowed him. He took it to another level, a French kiss. He pushed her to the bed. With a show of hands, Kaitesi invited her husband and even helped him remove his pants. Mugisha was a little nervous and shy. It was too much to handle. Something seemed not quite right. All his clothes down, he caressed his wife and kissed her more. He took his time, though apparently Kaitesi was in a hurry. She wanted her husband. Mugisha took his organ and gently pushed inside his wife. She was wet. She screamed like a porn star. but not the fake shout. They made love passionately. Unfortunately, Mugisha could not resist for long. He might have concluded the action before he could satisfy his wife. He hoped he was going to do it again. But when he invited Kaitesi to lay her head on his chest, she burst into tears. Mugisha asked her why she was crying. She did not say anything apart from, "Mugisha, I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" he asked. "For everything," she responded. "What do you mean by everything? Tell me, what happened? The last time we went for counseling, you mentioned a monster. Who are you talking about?" Mugisha insisted, but Kaitesi did not want to tell him. The night went back to their usual. He had hoped they would do it again, and one more time, and a fourth till morning, but his wife refused. For the whole night, Kaitesi was having nightmares. She screamed as if she was fighting with somebody. She talked about her daughter who, as she has told her husband, was fathered by her rapist. She said to the person in her nightmare, "She's my daughter, not yours." She begged that person to leave her alone. But what troubled Mugisha more is that his wife was also mentioning his name. "How did you meet Mugisha? Please leave him alone. He's not a monster like you." Then she would sleep again to wake up to another nightmare. She said, "No, I did not kill him. I did not kill him. I swear I did not kill him." In the morning, Mugisha woke up with a decision to call, not the married counselor, but the psychologist recommended to him by a friend of his who was a medical doctor. When he picked his phone, he realized he had received many WhatsApp messages. He couldn't believe his eyes. Retired Colonel Kanyamibwa had been found dead in a hotel room. Who killed retired Colonel Kanyamibwa? He wondered. He was a good man to whom I owed much. Colonel Kanyamibwa had helped Mugisha get his new job at Rock Builders Limited. He connected him with the company's managing director. They had met at a conference for young engineers. Even though they did not know each other before, when they met, they immediately became friends. Retired Colonel Kanyamibwa had even paid a couple of visits to Mugisha and Kaitesi. To Mugisha, Colonel Kanyamibwa was a nobleman. "Look at this," Mugisha said to Kaitesi. "Colonel Kanyamibwa is gone. He has been killed. Why? Now I'm angry at this country." Kaitesi did not respond. She walked away. Mugisha insisted and asked her why she could not say anything. Then she murmured, "I don't know. What tells you he has been killed?" "They said the killer might have hit something on his head. But why in a hotel room? How did he get there? Did they trap him with a prostitute?" When Mugisha turned on the TV, everybody was talking about that murder. It seemed like all people in the government and in the army were taken aback by the demise of retired Colonel Kanyamibwa. Different journalists spoke about him as one of the heroes of the liberation struggle, who deserved to retire peacefully and live long enough to enjoy what he had fought for. Mugisha was confused. "This does not look at all like a political murder," he mused. Colonel Kanyamibwa was respected and appreciated by many people in the government and the army. But who killed him? Although it seemed too early to talk to his family, Mugisha did not want to delay calling the colonel's wife and offering her his condolences. He must have been one of the first people to give her a call. Then, as he had planned, he called the psychologist and went to discuss with him about his wife's troubles. The psychologist empathetically listened to Mugisha, but instead of telling him how he could help his wife, he asked him to come back another day with Kaitesi. Mugisha did not feel like going anywhere else but back home. He wanted to hold Kaitesi in his arms again, even though he was still troubled by the death of Kano Kanyamibwa. When he arrived at home, shock crumbled all his bones. His house was surrounded by policemen. They immediately handcuffed him and said, "You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law." "My husband is innocent," Kaitesi shouted. "He did not kill anybody." She followed them, shouting the same words. They put Mugisha in the police van. Kaitesi kissed her husband and said, "I'm sorry. I'll make sure you get out." They took Mugisha to police custody. He was alone. There were no other detainees in that cell. The 5 days he spent in that room were the longest of his entire life. On different occasions, the policemen came to ask him the same questions repeatedly. "You were the last person Kano Kanyamibwa talked to before he was killed, right?" they asked. "What did he say to you? Why did he call you?" "I don't know why he called me," Mugisha responded. "He only asked me where I was, and I told him I was still at work. Then he asked, 'Till what time?' I told him I had a late office meeting and that I would get home around 6:30 p.m. That was it." He hung up. "Did he tell you where he was?" "No, he did not." "Did he ask you to join him at the hotel?" "No, he did not." "Where did you go after work?" "I went to my house immediately after work." "Who else did you talk to on that day?" "I don't remember any person in particular. I might have talked to a couple of friends, business partners, and my wife, of course." They kept repeating the same questions until when Mugisha got tired of answering. How could they suspect him to be an assassin, and worse, of the person to whom he owed a lot? He wondered. He concluded his life was meant to be bitter till death. Mugisha replayed the movie of everything he had gone through in his life. He remembered in 1990 when he was jailed, accused of being an ally to the patriotic forces. He was only 17 years old then. The former gendarme accused him of having gone for training on how to use guns with a plan to destabilize Rwanda. It was painful to find himself again in jail, accused of a crime he had not committed. He felt alone and lonely. His whole family was exterminated by their own compatriots in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. If it was not due to people like Kano Kanyamibwa, Mugisha believed he would not have survived. He had so much appreciation, gratitude, and respect for anybody who happened to be a member of the patriotic forces. His brain could not digest the fact that he was in jail, suspected of having killed one of his heroes. He thought about the pain of his wife, Kaitesi. He reflected on their marriage, which had never been as blissful as it should be. He believed he was the only person in the world his wife could count on. He could not imagine how she had felt to see him living, taken to jail, accused of a crime she did not believe for a second her husband could commit. Mugisha wanted to shout, scream, break, and leave this unfair world. He could not take it anymore, he mused. He tried to pray to God, but did not know what to say to the Almighty, apart from asking him why he continued to subject him to life's bitterness. After 5 days in police custody, Mugisha was taken to court. He had a lawyer, but did not know what to say to him. As much as the prosecution did not have any evidence to prove him guilty, He also did not have any evidence to prove his innocence. He decided to surrender his fate to the hands of his lawyer. Kaitesi was there, wearing all black as if her husband was dead. She had papers in her hands, and Mugisha wondered if she had discovered something that could help him. When Kaitesi entered the courtroom, she approached her husband, kissed him, and said again, "I'm sorry." Then she went to her seat. The prosecutor stated that Mugisha was a prime suspect because he was the last person Kanuka Nyamibwa had spoken to. He was also the first person who called the Kanu's wife to offer his condolences. His call to Kanuka Nyamibwa's wife was taken as camouflage. After the prosecutor's speech, the floor was given to Mugisha's lawyer. But instead of saying anything, the lawyer told the court that he wanted to present a crucial witness. Kaitesi stood up with the papers she held in her hands and moved forward to the witness's stand. She started reading her statement. "My name is Kaitesi. I was born in a family of 7. We were 3 girls and 4 boys. I'm the only one who is alive today. My parents, my 2 brothers, and my 2 sisters were killed during the genocide against the Tutsi. The 2 elder brothers had joined the patriotic forces to help other Rwandans liberate our beloved country from the former dictatorial regime. During the genocide against the Tutsi, I went through all horrible experiences. I was raped by the killers. I was tortured by them. I was beaten and insulted. The day the patriotic forces ended the genocide, it felt as if I had spent the night in hell to wake up in paradise. I thought my ordeal was over. I hoped that maybe my brothers had survived the war and that I was not going to be alone and lonely in this Rwanda. Madam, we sympathize with what you went through," the judge said, "but we do not see how your story is linked to the case of your husband." "It's related," Kaitesi responded. "Please lend me your ears. I will try to be brief." "Okay, carry on." "I asked every soldier I met if he knew my brothers Muhizi and Mihigo. Many of them said they knew them and that they were still alive, although they did not know where they were deployed. Then one day, fate took me to Kanuka Nyamibwa. They called him Afande Kanyamibwa. I guess he was a captain then. When I told him about my brothers, he told me he knew them, and I believed him because, unlike other soldiers, he described them with every detail. He even remembered that my brother Muhizi had a scar on his left ear and that my brother Mihigo had myopia. Apparently, they were in the same battalion or platoon. I don't know the difference between the two. He told me they were still alive and that they were at the border of Rwanda and Uganda, somewhere in Kagitumba. I was so happy. Afande Kanyamibwa was very kind to me. Since my parents' house had been demolished, he helped me get another house to live in and brought me everything I needed to survive. I looked up to him as my God-sent guardian angel. One day, he told me that he wanted me to go with him to Kagitumba to look for my brothers. I could not refuse. I had waited for that day. In the car towards Kagitumba, I was replaying my childhood memories with my brothers. I wept as I tried to practice how I would tell them the story of how the militiamen killed our parents and siblings. I didn't know if I would be able to tell them how the killers of my family raped me ferociously. "Madam, you said you were going to be brief," the judge reminded. "Did you meet your brothers? Please tell us what you know about the death of Kanuka Nyamibwa." "No, I did not meet my brothers. Till today, I don't know anything about how they died and where their corpses were buried. When we arrived at Kagitumba, Afande Kanyamibwa took me to a hotel and offered me food and drinks. He told me he had some work to do before he could take me to my brother's. He left me in that hotel room. I trusted him so much and believed that he would come back after the emergency he had to attend to. I waited for long, till dark hours. When he entered the room, he did not talk about my brothers. He immediately removed his clothes. I stood up quickly from the bed. He pushed me back. Even though he was smiling, something in his eyes crossed my chest and scared me in the stomach. He told me that I should not worry because he was a gentleman who would never hurt me. He added that all he wanted from me was some care. With a loud voice, I begged him to let me go. He removed his pants and pushed his organ inside me. Something happened. Instead of seeing the face of Afande Kanyamibwa, I saw the faces of the militiamen who had raped me in 1994 after exterminating my family. They slapped me, they spit on me, they insulted me. I lost sense of where I was and what was happening to me. I only remember someone giving me water and some tablets to swallow. Afande Kanyamibwa himself later told me they were sleeping pills. When I woke up, I was back to Kigali without my brothers. Afande Kanyamibwa kept on coming to my house. He apologized and said he wanted to marry me. I could not marry him. He was a monster. I later decided to move to another city. I went to Butare to live with my mother's aunt. She was very old and lonely. I found peace in her house, although it was short-lived. She died in 1998. When I came back to Kigali, I had a 4-year-old daughter. Although she was born in June 1995, I told all the people who knew me that my child was born in February and that she had been fathered by the militiamen who raped me during the genocide against the Tutsi. I'm sorry I lied to my husband. I lied to my daughter about who her father was. I never thought my ways would ever again cross those of Afande Kanyamibwa, till the day my husband, Mugisha, told me he was bringing a special visitor to our house, Kano Kanyamibwa. Kaitesi bent her head for seconds. Almost everybody in the courtroom was weeping with her. Mugisha could not believe his ears. So, my wife was not only raped by the militiamen who killed her family, but also the hero who saved her life? He mused. Sorry, please take heart, Mugisha's lawyer said to Kaitesi. Kaitesi raised her head again and said with a louder voice, After Kano Kanyamibwa learned I gave birth to his daughter, he told me his wife could not give him children, and that since he was growing old, he needed to tell my daughter he was his father. He called me during the daytime. He called me in the night. He continued to blackmail me until I decided to tell him that I would report him to authorities. I asked him if we could meet and talk outside my house. He invited me to that hotel and said we would meet at the poolside. What was your plan? The judge asked. Were you going to kill him? No, I wasn't, Kaitesi responded. When I arrived at the hotel, I did not see him. A hotel employee came to me and said he was going to show me where Afande Kanyamibwa was. When I noticed we were heading to the rooms, I got scared. I gathered all my strength because I was determined to confront the monster. When I entered the room, I found him seated on the chair around the coffee table. I did not want to sit next to him. I said, "Please leave my daughter alone." "Our daughter," he responded. "She's my daughter too." "No, she's not your daughter," I said. "How did you find my husband? What do you want from him?" After responding that Mugisha was his friend, Kano Kanyamibwa stood up, approached me and said, "You haven't changed. I like you girls. Believe me, I had not planned to harm Kanu Kanyamibwa in any way. But as he came closer, his face changed. He looked like the monsters who raped me. I felt helpless. He said he was sorry for what he had done to me. He told me he knew my brothers Muhizi and Mihigo, and that he remembered vividly how they died, and added that he couldn't tell me because it was a story that I might not want to listen to. Then he added, please, let me be a father to our daughter. Let me enjoy having a family, someone to call me Papa before I die. He approached me again and pulled me to his chest for a hug. It was my first time to see a man crying. He held me tight in his arms. I could not get his hands off me. When I pinched him, he got even more emotional and pulled me again to his chest. I decided to bite him hurtfully. He slapped me and moved away. I immediately ran to the door. He reached to catch me and asked to be forgiven for the slap. That was when I grabbed the chair, then I hit it to his head before I opened the door and ran away. I had no intention of killing him. After his wife admitted she murdered Kanu Kanyamibwa, Mugisha shouted, "My wife is innocent. She's the victim of what Afande Kanyamibwa did to her." "Order, please," said the judge. "You only talk when you are given the floor. Your wife has pleaded guilty for the murder of Kanu Kanyamibwa." Mugisha could not chew everything his wife had said. Why hadn't she told me before? He wondered. Despite her husband imploring, the judge decided to sentence Kaitesi to 10 years in jail for involuntary homicide. The story of Kaitesi was written and broadcast in many international and local media. Women in Rwanda and in other countries organized peaceful marches to request for the release of Kaitesi. There wore t-shirts on which it was written, "I am Kaitesi." Many women came out to tell their own stories. Some of them had been raped by militiamen. Some had been raped by soldiers. Some were raped by public officials, and others were raped by their employers or their managers. Some women said they were raped by family members and by their lovers or husbands. Basically, any woman who was a victim of sexual abuse rallied to defend Kaitesi. The news reached His Excellency, the President of Rwanda. On 29th January 2016, he granted the presidential pardon to Kaitesi. Mugisha and Kaitesi resumed their marriage counseling sessions. Kaitesi also visited a trauma therapist. She and her husband were determined to make their marriage work. Before Christmas of 2016, they were celebrating the birth of their first son. Kaitesi and her daughter also went through a reconciliation process. The daughter was angry at her mother because she had not told her who her father was. She told her mother how she had suffered since the day she had learned that she was fathered by the rapists of her mother and killers of her maternal grandparents, uncles, and aunts. She resented her mother for not revealing her father's actual identity, a man who was actually respected in society, but whom she got to know was her father after he was killed by her own mother. The end.